Welcome to a brand new week, a brand new day. We are getting ever so closer to the start of Notre Dame fall training camp. Along with Jesse Stiers, I'm Sean Stiers. IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling. 9 days to go, Jess. 9 days to go until the Fighting Irish open training camp.
I know. I was looking at the schedule here, and it doesn't look like Vince is ever going to work during training camp. Vacation.
We're going to take vacation when training camp starts. You know, like, who knew? Such a Vince move.
I hope he's listening out there.
I do too. Come on, D'Addario.
I am just backlogged with days. These last week, this week, next week. Vince might as well just had all of July off at the end of the day.
I know. When it all comes down to it, I've got some news that I need to tell him. I think he's going to be back on Wednesday, but your sister, of course, has been at camp the last couple of weeks, and one of her favorite counselors played for one Vince D'Addario at Riley High School. Apparently.
Oh,
so turns out. So got that connection. So we'll have to find out more about this guy. Looking forward to that. We're going to do some breakout candidates today. Hello, Andre. Andre Tonsil checking in. We've got an Andre question that's going to pop up in rapid fire a little bit later on today as well. Hit the like button as you filter into the show today. Counting you down, getting you closer to training camp. Breakout players is what we're going to do today. And we're not just going to rattle off a bunch of candidates for breakout players. The last time Jesse and I did something like this, we drafted teams of our breakout players. I was putting together a list of guys who are candidates. We originally said we were going to draft 5 players each. We could probably go 6 or 7 fairly comfortably if you want. How deep do you want to go in this thing?
Let's see.
Don't think too hard about this at the start of the show. Like, don't get too crazy. Like, well, here, let's start with this. The players who are not eligible, and we kind of talked about this. Riley Leonard, Xavier Watts, Riley Mills, Howard Cross, R.J. Oben, Benjamin Morrison, Chris Mitchell. He had a 1,000-yard season last year. He can't be a breakout candidate, even though he's new to Notre Dame. Jack Kaiser, Pat Coogan. One that I forgot, I don't think Jordan Faison can be a breakout candidate. He was the Sun Bowl MVP last year, right? He's already that to me was like his official.
It's funny
breakout.
because I was ready for you to have him on your list, and that was going to be my argument. Is you've used that in past shows that he is the Sun Bowl MVP, so he can no longer be a breakout candidate. The person I had questions about, how do we feel about Mitchell Evans?
I was kind of wondering about that as well. I felt like he was at the very least on his way to breaking out last season before the injury. And he ended up, he led the team in receiving, even though he only played in 8 games. So
that's what I mean.
So if you're the team leader in receiving, have you broken out? Like
as a tight end too?
Yeah.
You're not a wide receiver leading the team. I think it's just a matter of staying healthy. So like that's where I just don't know. I don't want to consider Mitchell Evans.
Okay, we can leave him off. That's fine. I kind of think he has, like, the only thing that maybe, like the fact that he did miss 5 games and he's coming back from injury, I feel like he has broken out myself.
Yeah, at this point, it's just like comeback player of the year, not breakout player of the year.
Right. And kind of, I think, do you put Rocco Spindler into that category?
Yeah.
An old breakout.
I mean, he broke out, earned his spot last year, and now he's just got injuries again.
Coming back from injury. That's right. but I feel like Rocco Spindler has already broken out as well. Christian Gray has not broken out, D-Troll Hunter. Like, I don't know if you're just throwing that out there as a candidate, but he is eligible for this. So how deep we going? 5, 6, 7, 8? Like,
why don't we get to 5 and then see how we're feeling after that? If we feel like there's enough substance left.
I feel like there's enough substance. I'm going to give you the first draft pick, as always.
Oh,
so you get to go first. Are we gonna? Well, we'll just go back and forth. There's we don't have to worry about snaking. There's only 2 of us. So, who you going with first? Who is your number 1 prime candidate to be a fall breakout player?
This is tough, but I'm gonna have to go with Jeremiah Love first overall.
All right, explain.
Yeah, I just feel like, Jeremiah Love is stepping into the lead role back. Last season, he got some carries here and there, and not only is he going to be the lead back, but he's going to be asked to also split out wide and catch passes as a wide receiver. And so, what to me, what that shows is that he's the most dynamic player on the entire offense. They're the guy that they want to find ways to get the ball as much as possible. Like, running the ball isn't enough, and so if you're finding ways to get a guy the ball through, receptions as well when he's a running back, it just shows to me that a large part of this offense has to go through him. And I think if they want to be a good offense and a successful offense like we envision, then that means Jeremiah Love has to have a big season.
That is true. That is very true. And, again, like, even though he played last year, he qualifies for this because he was not the number 1 back last year, but they definitely need him to be an explosive player from the line of scrimmage. Now, a couple of clarifications. Sloppy Joe says, does breakout candidates mean you guys think they're going to break out or guys Notre Dame needs to break out? These are guys we think are going to break out.
Big seasons.
Right. Not
maybe
need.
It's a guy. Well, I think this can be really...
and there was some, like Jeremiah Love, there were some who would say, well, that's obvious. Well, he hasn't done anything yet. So that's why he's still a breakout candidate, right?
I think there's 2 ways that this ultimately goes. A guy who earns a starting position spot that you maybe didn't think that's a breakout. And then 2, a guy who maybe got some playing time, but he wasn't like 1,000-yard receiver and 6 touchdowns. He just had some catches here or there. Like, we need consistency, not a guy who had 300 yards and 20 catches on the year. That's not breakout. That's just average performance. And so we're talking about, yes, maybe someone who's seen the field, but they're going to have stud-like or star-like numbers, or a guy who maybe isn't 2nd or 3rd on the depth chart that ends up in a starting position at some point.
Right.
At least that's kind of how I look. Those are like my 2 scenarios.
I don't disagree with that at all. And the biggest rushing game that Jeremiah Love had last year was 57 yards. So, like, in his case, none of the running backs behind Audric Estime have truly broken out yet because Estime was the lead back. None of these guys have shown yet that they can be the lead back. So that's why they're candidates for this. Now, Joe also says, looking for some clarification. So you're saying Faison is already better than, so you're saying Faison is better than Greathouse already. I mean, not necessarily saying it in that way, but here's the fact. Like, 1, Faison was the Sun Bowl MVP. He had a huge game. 2, Faison played in 7 games last year. Greathouse played in 12 games. Faison had 1 more reception than Greathouse and had more yardage than Greathouse. So, like, Faison played in 5 fewer games than Greathouse last year, but it had better production overall in 5 fewer games. So that's why Greathouse has to still be considered a breakout candidate, because he was a contributor, but he was not a number 1 receiver last year, not even producing like a number 2 receiver last year. So that's why he still has to be considered for this as well. So Jesse has Jeremiah Love at the top of his list, and there are so many different ways that I can go with this. Do I want to go
It's kind of like a
offense?
fantasy draft.
I know. Do I want to go offense? Do I want to go defense? There are a lot of great candidates out there. And like D. Trolls Hunter said, Greathouse had a fair amount. He had 5 touchdowns last year, but
That's kind of
again,
it.
that's not a breakout. That's he was a solid contributor over the course of the season in what was essentially, an underproductive position group. But I'm gonna go with Jaden Greathouse at the top of my list. You were hoping that I would let him get right back to you, weren't you? Because
Yes.
I think that this guy is going to be one of the top 2 receivers on this team this year. Much more productive in year 2 than he was in year 1 when he had 18 receptions for just 265 yards. And yeah, he had some touchdowns last year. He led the receiving corps. He led all receivers with 5 touchdowns last year. But this is a guy who I think is ready to take the next step. I know Salty thinks he's ready to take the next step to be the guy. So I'm going with Jaden Greathouse with my number 1 pick.
There's a lot of discord in the chat about Greathouse and Faison. About if you got to count one, you should count the other. Yada yada yada. I'm in agreement where we're at right now.
I just disagree with that because again, Faison played in 5 fewer games than Greathouse. Greathouse, he didn't have a great year. He had a freshman receiver type year. He didn't have a breakout type year. And the fact that Faison finished his season with a 100-yard game, the first 100-yard game for a Notre Dame receiver in like 2 years, like that to me was like Jordan Faison has officially broken out. Jaden Greathouse has not approached that yet. So I don't think they're even. Like if you look at their production, they look even, but if you played it out over the course of the entire season, Faison would have had much bigger stats. DK just trying to throw the jabs right in there.
He's enjoying this.
It's salty. All right, so you got Love, I've got Greathouse. Where are you going now?
I have to start going in on defensively. It would be a disservice if I didn't take this guy, so I'm going to go with Drake Bowen with my number 2 pick.
Going with the linebacker. All right.
I think Drake Bowen is going to be the leading tackler on this defense. I believe that, and why I say this is a breakout role, he's never started. You're asking basically a true sophomore to step in and be your starting Mike linebacker, and that's most important position on a defense that's not easy to run. We know that this defense has elements of NFL style. Al Golden likes to challenge his players because he knows that they are, they're smart enough to handle the schemes and the concepts and that sort of stuff. So I think it's going to be a lot for Drake Bowen. I think he might start a little slow. And I think people might, we might hear some of the KVA chatter a little bit, but I think we have to stick with Drake Bowen through the entire season, give him his, due process essentially. And he's going to be, again, the leading tackler on this defense when it's all said and done.
I think so as well. I think that he's going to have a great year. And, a lot of people obviously pushing for KVA, Kingston Viliamu, Asa. But remember, the reason that maybe there's debate is because Drake Bowen is the number 1 Mike linebacker in front of KVA. So I think that, that kind of leads to some of that discussion. I want to go back to like I don't want to get hung up on it, but like D. Troll Hunter says, Faison is going to back up Greathouse. I just don't get hung up on the depth chart, especially where Greathouse and Faison come into play. They are definitely 2 of Notre Dame's top 6 receivers, probably 2 of their top 4 receivers. And yeah, they both play slot, but Greathouse is going to play outside quite a bit. So don't get hung up on Greathouse is a slot, Faison is a slot. You're going to see Faison line up in a lot of different places. They're going to play on the field at the same time together a lot, I think. So don't get hung up on that. And Andrew says Greathouse pre and post injury, 2 different players. I agree. The injury played a part in it. And the injury is all, it also played a part in why Greathouse has not broken out so far. So it's not like a knock on Greathouse to say, well, the injury slowed him, the injury was a factor. So that's why, part of why he hasn't broken out yet. Okay, so you got Jeremiah Love, Drake Bowen. I've got Greathouse, and I've also now got Billy Schrouth. I was very excited to take Schrouth. I am very excited to take Schrouth with my number 2 pick. And I mean, we've essentially got like as good a season as Rocco Spindler had, and as solid a season, I would say, as Pat Coogan had at left guard. The fact that Billy Schrouth was able to get himself on the field after Spindler was injured and perform at the level that he did down the stretch, and is really, of the 3, probably considered more of a lock to be one of those 2 guards, most likely the right guard, leaving the other 2 to kind of battle for that left guard, says how good he is. But, again, Schrouth has only played in a handful of games, but has looked pretty great so far. So Schrouth, I've got with my number 2 pick.
I love that you went offense, because that allows me to continue to cherry pick this defense that is going to have stars all over the field. I'm in a bind right now because Benjamin Morrison is going to serve some time. He's not going to be ready game 1. We know what Jaden Mickey is. We know Christian Gray is going to have to step up. But the thing becomes, what happens when Benjamin Morrison comes back? And so that's where I think it could become a competition between Gray and Mickey. And if Gray does enough in, Morrison's absence, who's to say that he couldn't take over, that starting spot? So I don't want to touch the corners quite yet. All that being said,
interesting setup with the way you were leading things there.
Well, sometimes you got to talk out loud to get to your final conclusion.
I got you.
You teed this one up pretty good for me. I'm going to go with Charles Jagasaw on the offensive line.
All right. Nice one. Now, a lot of available talent here with this number 3 pick.
And the reason I'm going Jagasaw is I think he plays the most important position on the entire offensive line, and he's going to be one of the youngest. And so I think the combination of young, the severity of the position, and the talent, I think he's going to be molded into the next great on the offensive line. It's just a matter of how fast he gets there. And I think he's going to take that step this year. So that's where I'm at on that one.
I like it. At the top of my list, I've got Love, Schrouth, Jagasaw, Greathouse. I've got somebody else in there I'm not going to mention just yet. I think those are all very excellent candidates. And I think Jagasaw, for as little experience as what he has, he's kind of, and the fact that he's even younger than Schrouth, he's kind of being, he's going to be leaned on in that left tackle spot, but it's almost like, oh, it's a given. He's the guy, but what exactly is that going to look like? But I think that is definitely a great pick. So now I've got 2 offensive guys so far, and you just laid out the case, I guess, pro and con with the cornerbacks.
Yeah.
I'm just taking Christian Gray here because I think that this is a steal with my number 3 pick. The fact that I still get Christian Gray here in my breakout player draft after Greathouse and Schrouth, because again, you kind of laid it out, and even if it is Christian Gray and Benjamin Morrison on the field at the same time, we've kind of talked about this before. Well, you can only throw at one guy. And I think that with the reputation going into his junior season that Benjamin Morrison already has, teams are going to be less apt to try to throw Benjamin Morrison's way early on. And I think Christian Gray is going to be the beneficiary of that. And that's ultimately why I think he is going to be, if he's not the interception leader for the Fighting Irish defense this season, I think he'll be one of the top 2 interception leaders for the Notre Dame defense this season. So I get Gray with number 3 pick. Feeling pretty good about that.
So we're 3-3.
Yeah, just let me kind of go through our lists here for some people maybe jumping in a little bit late. So far, Jesse has Jeremiah Love, Drake Bowen, Charles Jagasaw. I've got Jaden Greathouse, Billy Schrouth, Christian Gray. That's who we each have. 3-3 so far. What's your instinct tell you on how deep we're going to go in this so far? I think we need
6
to go
or
to
7.
At least, I think we need to go to 7. I think we need to go to 7. You're eyeing your lists and you're like, this is just like your fantasy draft. It's like, did I put enough people on my list? Can I
I have a big board.
Okay, the board is big.
I have a big board.
By the way, Salty is going to say this because
come on, you're not taking that one.
I mean, I don't know how seriously I can take that. Let me ask you this: where we are so far, even going 7 deep, are you considering any of the right guard candidates at this point?
Let me double check the right.
Tosh
guards.
Baker, Emil Wagner, freshman Gerby Lambert.
No.
Okay.
No, I have far
Neither
too
am
many. I have far too many prospects on defense right now.
Okay. Yeah, with there only 2 defensive players have been taken so far. So what are you thinking?
Man, my next pick's going to be a Don Schuler. I think a big one is going to be the safety position on the defense. Someone has to step up. I think there's a possibility of like 3 guys, but I think a Don Schuler will be the guy to break out and be that safety alongside Xavier Watts. I think Rod Hurd will get in there on more maybe critical downs, where they can feel like he's going to be more trustworthy and dependable. But I still think a Don Schuler is going to be a difference maker, and he will be the starting safety game 1.
I was hoping for him maybe as a steal a little bit.
I know, and that's why I had to take him because I think he's one of those. There's some guys on my list that have high upside. You know what I mean? Like Rocco Spindler last year, high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
And so I knew if I let a Don Schuler go, he probably wouldn't get back to me again. So I had to kind of pull the trigger maybe a little bit early, but I still got some hidden gems on this.
Still got some magic coming.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So see, now I'm debating, like, do I get this player now? Do I let him, see if he comes back to me? And D. Troll Hunter saying, you meant to say right tackle. Did I say left tackle when I was talking about?
You said right guard.
Oh, did I say guard? Okay.
Yeah.
I messed it up again. So, okay. Yeah. Obviously I meant tackle. I was talking about the 3 tackle candidates. Yeah. Because I got Billy Schrouth, who's going to be the right guard. So
I know who you're going with.
As far as I'm concerned, like when I look at the defensive guys, there's a lot there, and I really like them. There's a couple who I really like, but like that, I won't say I really like, but I'll just say this: like I'm not 100% sold. So what I've got to do is go back to the offensive side.
Come on, don't do this to me.
Do you know who I'm taking here?
I hope it's not who. I have like one person left on my offensive list that I really want.
Bo Collins?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I just took Bo Collins then. Because I think that, as I've already got Jaden Greathouse, again, who gives you great positional flexibility. And Bo Collins is going to be more that boundary guy, and he has shown what he can do as a downfield threat, like when you look at his track record at Clemson. And I think he's going to have a more consistent quarterback throwing to him this year than what he's had the last couple of years at Clemson. And I don't know that he's going to put up necessarily monster numbers, but I think he's going to have a really good year. And I like the fact that he's one of the guys that Marcus Freeman took to New York last year.
Yeah, that's who I
or
wanted.
last week. I think that that kind of says something about him. So Bo Collins is my number 4 guy.
It's okay because that's who I wanted. And I know if I would have went Bo last pick, you probably would have went a Don Schuler. So it's okay. We flip flopped there.
Okay.
This next pick is such a wild card because they have all the talent to do what they need to. It's just a matter of whether or not it's going to click. And if it doesn't, this tees up another, good position behind it. But I just have to go with Jalen Sneed because I think it's either now or never for him type situation.
Yep.
And I think it's worth the roll of the dice because all the athleticism, the speed, everything is there. It's just a matter of can he tie it all together. So again, this is a young linebacker group outside of Kaiser. I wouldn't be surprised if Osbury sees some time as well. But it's just got to be Jalen Sneed with what's left, like talent wise on defense. Like he was a stud recruit, and it's time for him to kind of show up, in my opinion.
I agree, and I agree with what you're saying about now or never because he's going to have opportunities, and he's been here for 3 years now. So,
but now the leash is short because there is someone very talented behind him.
Yes, that's exactly right. Very talented, and he's got to go show that he can go out and produce. Has he absorbed enough of this system now that he's more comfortable out there? Because and we didn't get to see a ton, but we didn't necessarily see Sneed making a whole lot of plays at the end of spring. So I think Notre Dame really needs him to be a playmaker out there defensively this year. So you're right. It really needs to happen. Now, D. Trollhunter throwing Chris Mitchell out there. We took Mitchell off the board for this because he had a 1,000-yard season at FIU last year.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I just is there a case for him to be a breakout candidate just because he's new at Notre Dame? Or, he's had double the production, for example, of Bo Collins. That's why, you can say, well, Collins has made some plays. He's played at Clemson, but again, he hasn't been he wasn't a huge performer. He made some plays, but I think that there is still a lot of overall upside for Collins here at Notre Dame in comparison. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. So I'm going to go with Jaden Osbury with my next pick. And, you were just talking about Sneed and the competition that's out there for him. And I'm going to go with Osbury. Guy, I'm really going to be curious to see if his late spring performance production carries over into fall training camp, because we've seen guys flash before in the spring and it hasn't turned into anything in training camp. But they talked about him as a guy who can play multiple positions, maybe, like between the rover, like will type stuff, the nickel, all those different things. And I think that he is definitely going to be out there at the very least, like in some packages and stuff like that. We've talked about that with some other guys before, but I'm going to go with Jaden Osbury as kind of the alternate. If not Sneed, Osbury, one of those two guys has to do it, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of I have Jaden Mickey in my back pocket because you went Christian Gray, so you're not going to go Jaden Mickey on top of that.
Right.
So I know I got him. He's probably going to be towards my last pick of the draft just for that reason. So I think it's only time we have a little bit of fun. So my next pick is going to be Boubacar Traore.
Ooh, okay. All right. I like that.
I think that, we all know that I am amongst many people, very questionable with the Viper position, questionable of Jordan Botelho's consistency. To be quite honest with you, his just motor or want. I just don't think he shows up every play for a guy that is, wants to be an every down starter. We know this defensive line already rotates in and out a lot. I've kind of alluded to it being kind of like a hockey style line change. You know what I mean? They're constantly rotating guys in and out. And I think Boubacar is going to get opportunities early on, and I think he's going to honestly show more than Botelho. I think Botelho is going to be his typical cycle of kind of flat, and then as the season goes on, maybe picks up the production. But I just think there's going to be no time to wait for Botelho, and I think that while Junior is also a good option, he's not a true defensive end or viper, and I like what Boubacar has shown. So I think he's my real kind of dark horse in this whole thing. I wanted to take him earlier, but I knew there was no need. There was a lot of other good players kind of ahead of him. So that's where I'm at. Give me Boubacar.
Okay. I like him as kind of a late steal here with the second to the last pick, basically, that we're going to have, because we decided we're going 7 deep, and that was your number 6 pick. So I like Traore for you here.
Let's go 8, by the way.
Oh, you want to go 8 now? Okay. You were like, oh, I don't know if I could even go 7 before. So, okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to go KVA with my number 6 pick.
Okay.
And the fact that I'm getting him this deep, I think, is a complete steal as well. I thought that maybe you'd snatch up a couple of linebackers. I guess you do actually have a couple of linebackers along the way. But I like Viliamu Asa is going to play. What the role looks like, beyond special teams. We know he's going to end up on probably most of the special teams, at least to start off the season. How big his role is in the defense otherwise, I think, is going to be a big question. Like, I could easily see where Notre Dame is in some blowout games. He comes in and plays the fourth quarter, and you're going to have definitely people, oh, KVA is out there making plays. Why isn't he playing more, and all that different kind of stuff. But I just like it. Number 6 pick, it's a no-brainer to take Kingston Viliamu Asa, I think. So now we've got 2 picks to go since we're going to 8. We've each got picks.
Man, I have some options here.
You do. Still some good ones.
My last pick is a very good pick. This pick is tough because I don't know what you're thinking right now. I can't contradict myself. I'll just wait until after you pick because I don't want to give you any ideas, but I'm going to go with Jaden Mickey on this one. Like I said, we know, what Benjamin Morrison is, and there's still the chance that he's not going to play week 1. So, I mean, that's 2 young corners on the road at Texas A&M. They're going to get challenged, right? And so one of them is going to step up, in my opinion, that's just the flip of the coin. So one of us is going to look like a genius and the other one's going to look like not an idiot, but and this is the thing too, even though I still think Mickey, Gray, Morrison are all going to have, solid seasons. They're all going to contribute in some way. It's just a matter of who's going to be better between Mickey and Gray. And you went Gray, so I'm going to go. I have no other choice but to go Mickey. I need to get a corner on this list to be well-rounded. So I'm going to go Jaden Mickey.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. Like if I'm taking Christian Gray, you probably needed to have Mickey late, like you said, to at least be able to balance it out. He should have more opportunity this year than what he's had the last couple of years. And he was one of those guys where there was some talk. Would he stay? Would he transfer? And ultimately he decided to stay. And a really good thing that he did because as I've said plenty of times this summer, my biggest concern with the corners specifically is the depth, especially depending on what happens to Benjamin Morrison. But even if Morrison's there, you basically have Morrison, Gray, Mickey, and Jordan Clark as your experienced guys. That's it. Now, Rod Hurd obviously has played nickel, so he could potentially be an option and kind of give you some flexibility there as well. But they're obviously counting on him to be able to play more safety, especially early on. Joshua says they'll give them young guys limited responsibility. Just let them rip and chase. We've got great athletes.
Yeah, I agree with this. The reason why I put this up is he's right. The guys that are just young studs, KVA, these young linebackers, Bodie Calhoun, Preston Zinter, Kahano Kia, Like those guys are just going to be asked to run around and be fast, essentially, right? And that's what Joshua was basically saying with this comment. And I agree. There is a ton of depth at the linebacker, a ton of young depth at the linebacker position.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got 2 picks to go, and I've got 2 guys who I'm really eyeing here, and I'm trying to decide between them. And I'm going to go with Ashton Craig because, again, center, I really liked the physicality that he gave him when he was in there at the end of the season. The last, what would that be, 2.5, 3 games, whatever it was, down the stretch of the season. And he's going to be the center, and there's every reason to believe that he's going to perform at a pretty high level. So that's where I'm going. So now we've each got 1 pick left. What are you going to do with yours?
What do you have any guesses who I might go with?
Well, I don't want to give it away, like who I might be going with next.
See, the thing is I don't think you would ever guess it, so that's why I was curious.
I think it's going to be an offensive player here. Am I right?
No, I'm going to go, and it's not defense either. I'm going James Rendell as the my last pick of the draft.
I like it.
This is why I wanted an 8th pick, because I needed Jaden Mickey, but I knew I was taking James Rendell with my last pick because I knew you wouldn't think of it. And the reason why I'm going with this is he's a new punter. He's got great hang time. He's got that Australian, that kick and roll, that yards after the punt. And I think flipping field position is going to be huge this year. And I know how important it is to Marcus Freeman. And I just think we're going to see an overall performance upgrade in the punting game. And I know that's not the sexiest thing to say or the most fun thing to say, but it still has an impact. And especially when you're trying to flip field against really hard teams or on neutral fields or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Small details matter. And so I think you're going to see a great, the thing is he's never played in a American setting. And so this is why I consider it a breakout performance, because we don't know what we're going to get. Right. And at the end of the day, we don't know what we're going to get out of this guy. And so it could go either really well or really bad. And I think he's going to break out and end up being an NFL punter someday.
Yeah. I mean, he'll be a total breakout if he makes it. So I like it. DK says you just picked him because you guys look like twins.
That's a compliment. Thank you.
So my last pick, that was good. That was kind of sneaky of you to get that one in there. It's like, do I go with one of the backup quarterbacks? I want to stay away from that because there's so much in the fact that, as we talked about, Angeli went to New York. I think that, there's some statement there, and obviously what they think of Angeli. So to me, it came down to a couple of different guys on the defensive line, and I am going to go with Josh Burnham as my final pick.
Ooh, I like that.
I like him to be a really good complement to RJ Oben and continue to show growth this year and really try to make a statement for himself toward next year with what he can do. We saw some good growth. He's continued to add some good weight to his frame to kind of be able to withstand and do some battle with those, with the tackle guard combination and all that different kind of stuff. And DK says Onye, and he would have been my number 9 guy. He would have been next, but I'm going with Josh Burnham instead. Onye, he was a spring breakout last year, and we didn't see that translate. So I'm not going to push my chips in on him. He had a nice spring this year as well, but I want to see something first before I feel like I don't want to put him in that Botelho category just yet, but he's sort of there's definitely a lot of talent there, but he's got to show that he can do it. So that's why I went with Josh Burnham instead. See,
I thought you were going to go with Jadarian Price to end your draft.
I thought about it, and I felt I went back at because I just to kind of keep things balanced, with the fact that we left off Jordan Faison, like Price had a 100-yard game in that Sun Bowl as well. So maybe he hasn't broken all the way out, but, I feel like he's at least broken a little bit more out. So since that was the justification that I had with Faison, I thought in fairness, I would keep Price up because I thought
basically
about
what it
taking
came
him
down to is you went 2 wide receivers.
Yeah.
Instead of 1 wide receiver, 1 running back.
Yeah.
That's
so
really
here's how the 2 teams ended up looking. Jesse has Jeremiah Love, Drake Bowen, Charles Jagasaw, Adon Schuler, Jalen Sneed, Boubacar Traore, Jaden Mickey, and James Rendell. I have Jaden Greathouse, Billy Shrouth, Christian Gray, Bo Collins, Jaden Osbury, Kingston Viliamu Asa, Ashton Craig, and Josh Burnham.
I think what we need to do is you need to go to the Champions Lounge. You need to create a post, put both of our rosters.
Who's got the better team and let people vote?
We'll let people vote who has the better rosters. And then come into the season, we can always come back to it and then revisit it. But I think that it'd be fun to post it and see what side people are on. Because I do think that, I guess I'm curious to see if it's overwhelmingly one side or the other, or if it's more, I'm assuming it'll probably be 50-50 just because we have 8 guys and there's a lot of talent on each of these sides.
Mm-hmm.
But I want some public opinion. So I think that we should post this and see who has.
I mean, the straw poll here in the chat is on my side right now, so we can put it up
but
there.
we got a lot of like super fans on one player in the comments. We got to look at the totality of the entire roster.
Yeah, and I mean, look, when all is said and done,
I want rationale too.
How they actually produce is going to be the biggest thing, right?
Yeah,
I mean that's what we're looking for. How they actually produce.
If you had the number 1 pick, would you still went Greathouse or would you have gone Love?
I probably would have taken Love. Yeah.
All right. Well, I would have went Greathouse if you picked Love. So
okay. So we were both thinking the same thing. We had those 2 guys.
I was definitely not going Billy Strauss with my second pick.
Really? Okay.
I was 100% taking a young defensive player.
I like it.
See, I think this is the fun to my list. Is I feel like my list always has higher reward on it.
Jesse still hangs his hat on the fact that he took Rocco Spindler the last time we did this. And
That's what won it for me.
I couldn't tell you anybody else on any of the lists.
It doesn't matter.
We had.
It doesn't
you
matter.
You had Rocco Spindler, so yeah, that's right.
Last year, what did we say was the biggest question going into the offensive was the offensive line, and the biggest position was that guard spot, and no one thought Rocco was going to get it.
On that subject, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it.
I feel like this is a good segue to where we're going, because ESPN has wide receiver as Notre Dame's biggest question mark heading into this season. So my question is, what do you have as Notre Dame's biggest question mark?
Wide receiver. I think the offensive line, while it's young and inexperienced, will find its way. I think they have a quarterback that, as long as he stays healthy, is going to produce. I feel more confident about Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price than I do, than this wide receiver room as a whole. And listen, it shouldn't be a coincidence that, the recent wide receiver struggles in terms of recruiting parallels, what ESPN also thinks is Notre Dame's kind of biggest question mark going into the season, right? And that's the fun part about this, is because if the offense handles its business, all of these questions and all of these problems become solved. It just takes this offense producing and showing everyone that, it's a new offense. And that's essentially what it is Marcus Freeman really hasn't had an identity on the offensive side since being the head coach at Notre Dame. I think he's found some consistency in Denbrock, and he's going to provide consistency at quarterback, offensive scheme, wide receiver room. All of these things are naturally going to work out over the next couple of years, but it always takes that first class to kind of sway things, to show people, hey, this is what this offense is capable of accomplishing. So, and again, to me, it's offensively, the wide receiver position is what's going to take them over the top. If they produce and have a lot of success at wide receiver, combined with, how good we know they're going to be on defense, then really what's stopping this team?
It's a fair take. And obviously, especially when you look at last year, there's every reason to say wide receiver should be the number one question, because especially if you're looking outside in, it's like, well, you got no production from the wide receivers last year. The offense traditionally doesn't get much production from the wide receivers. Can they actually get production from the wide receivers? But to me, the fact that they brought in these three experienced guys, including Jaden Harrison, but the two primaries being Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins, and I think the continued evolution of these young guys like Greathouse and Faison, whom we've talked about, it should be okay. But then again, we thought it was going to be okay last year, and it just turned into a total mess. But the two reasons it turned into a total mess to me, one was the whole Tobias Merriweather thing. We just put way too much expectation on Tobias Merriweather because of recruiting rankings and what we thought he was going to be, and yada, yada, yada. And then we had no idea what a mess everything was internally with the position coach and everything else. And then you throw the injuries, the hamstring injuries specifically on top of all that. And that led to some of that. So there's every reason to say that it is. But to me, foundationally, it is much more the offensive line that is the biggest question. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that it is going to be a bad offensive line, but specifically the right tackle has to get solved. There are three candidates who we've mentioned, Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner, the two veterans, and then the incoming freshman, Gerby Lambert. And, maybe the presence of a young, talented guy like Lambert, even if he doesn't win the job, pushes those other two guys to get better. And one of them, doesn't just sort of win the job by default, but actually takes it over. And even Jagasaw at the other side is going to be a question because, again, he's stepping in for a guy who was a top 6 pick in the NFL draft. Both of these guys, a first-round pick and a second-round pick. So to me, the fall off in the actual production that they have, there is true fall off there. Whereas like what Notre Dame lost from the receiver core last year, there's really the only place to go is up from last year. So that's why the offensive line, and that's not even to mention the fact that the flux you've got, you're replacing a guy who was a pretty good center, not a great center, but you got him to transfer out to NC State because you got a guy like Craig coming in. And then what's going to happen, we don't know officially. We think Shrouth is going to be the right guard. And then is it going to be Coogan or Spindler at the left guard? So there's still some questions to go in there at a very important, especially when you've got a quarterback who did have the kind of injury that he had last year. You got to protect him. You got to, like everything that comes down to the offensive line between protection, running the ball, all that. So that's why I put offensive line at the top of the list as opposed to the receivers. But again, there's a case for wide receiver. But like when we did the position group rankings last week, Vince and we both had receiver above the tight ends and above the offensive line. And Notre Dame, what's Notre Dame predominantly been known for the past 10, 15 years? Tight ends and offensive line. You can go back like 20 years with tight ends and offensive line. And we put our confidence more so in the wide receiver group than we put in the tight end and the line coming into this year. All right. So we're moving on. Next question comes from Andre Tonsel, regular, of course, of the show. Listener, subscriber, everything else. He put this up on the boards today, and he tweeted this at me, asked me if I would use this in rapid fire as well. So here it is. What if Notre Dame is ranked as the number 4 team in the country with a record of 11-1, and the College Football Playoff Committee seeds them number 7 or 8 because the teams that lost the Power Four conference championship games lost in close games. So what do you think of this as a possibility?
What I think is if any team goes into a playoff matchup ranked below Notre Dame and they beat a team better than themselves and Notre Dame, they'll leapfrog Notre Dame. If they lose, no matter how close it is, I still think that they stay below Notre Dame.
Don't forget, if you win the conference championship game, you are automatically, well, I won't say automatically, the top four conference champ, the four highest rated conference champions get those, 1 through 4 seats. So that could be potentially a group of 5, like if the group of 5 team is considered to be ranked higher than a Power 4, for example. But if you win your conference, the teams that win their conference championship games, those are the teams that get seeded 1 through 4.
Yeah, so basically what it would come down to is, would a team lower than Notre Dame beat a team higher than Notre Dame, get a conference championship, automatically lock up one of those 1 through 4 spots, and the team that was previously ahead of Notre Dame, will they stay ahead of Notre Dame even though they lost? So I think that this question has a lot of layers to it, and it's hard when you play a lot of the hypotheticals because I feel like there's so many counter arguments.
And that's kind of the problem, and there's always going to be an argument against everything. And I guess I would say, first of all, when I look at this as a scenario, I think the odds against this specific scenario are probably around 500 to 1, that this could happen. Because, again, when you look at the layers, the closest Notre Dame has been to this specific scenario would be 2021. They were the number 5 ranked team before the playoffs. They were 11-1. Their only loss was to Cincinnati, which was 13-0 and ranked number 4. So that's the closest Notre Dame has been. But, in that specific year, you also had Georgia and Alabama in the top 3 was, again, Cincinnati at number 4. And then you had Michigan at number 2. But for Notre Dame to be 11-1, but still be ranked number 4 would most likely mean that their loss is to one of the top 3 teams in the country. And that team in all likelihood would be undefeated going into championship weekend, conference championship weekend. So if Notre Dame is number 4 going into conference championship weekend, that would mean they were already ranked ahead of one of the Power 4 conference teams going into that weekend, which means that team also would have at least one loss. So either way, the best seed that Notre Dame can get, obviously, is a number 5. So they basically start with that seed. So I kind of played this out a little bit. Let's say 12-1 Michigan loses to 10-2 Ohio State in the Big Ten. 12-1 Alabama loses to 12-1 Georgia in the SEC. 11-1 Baylor loses to 11-2 Oklahoma State in the Big 12. And then in the ACC, in this example, I'm saying Florida State is 12-0, and that's the team that Notre Dame lost to. They lose to a 10-2 Clemson team. So you've got multiple lost teams winning those conference championship games. So that means Alabama, Baylor, Michigan all had one loss going into their championship games. Florida State was undefeated. Notre Dame had one loss, close loss to Florida State. Again, that's probably the only way they're going to be there. So, there's also an outside chance that a group of 5 champ jumps into the top 4 since you've got so many 2-loss conference champions, because again, it's the high, you've still got to attain the highest rank. It's not necessarily you're one of the 4 highest ranked teams, but you're the highest ranked conference championship. So they could conceivably drop to 7 or 8. I think 7, as a low if they were 4 before that, but I still, they don't have the extra game. Either way, they still get a first round playoff game that they're going to get to host because 5, 6, 7, and 8 are going to get to host. I just still think it's very unlikely because, again, you've got them with one loss and ranked as the number 4 team. So I think it's a very unlikely scenario, but again, there's so many layers to it. There's just so many factors for something like that to make it actually happen.
Yeah, and I think long story short, what's going to have to happen is an underdog and a conference champion is going to have to beat an undefeated or one-loss team ahead of Notre Dame. And now both of those teams would be ahead of Notre Dame by default, essentially. That's
right.
No matter what the conference is. And so how many times that happens, whether that's, maybe the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC, or maybe it's just one conference, I do believe if a team is to upset a higher-ranked team and win the conference, then both of those teams in the conference championship are likely to be ahead of Notre Dame. And that's regardless of conference. I think that's across the table.
And I mean, this is the bottom line here, what Josh is saying. Notre Dame goes undefeated, gets the 5 seed. I mean, that's it. That's really the only way they're going to control their own destiny. I don't think, barring, like 6 teams being undefeated potentially, I don't see them being any lower than the 5 if they're undefeated, And again, like part of this scenario that Andre had was that they already had 1 loss. So if you already have 1 loss, there's just, some of that is going to be out of your own hands to a good extent, I think is what it comes down to.
Sorry, my dogs aren't smart enough to know that their own owner has come home.
Hey, it happens. One of those happens all the time. So these are the college football programs that have the most all-time wins without ever winning a national championship. Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Utah, North Carolina, Missouri, Purdue, Oregon, Baylor, and NC State. Which, Jesse, do you think is the most surprising?
To me, the most surprising comes down to Wisconsin and Oregon. And at the end of the day, I'm going to have to say, because it's like Wisconsin is more of like your true kind of more feels like blue blood type, been around a while. How have they not won it type situation? But Oregon is like they've come on strong recently and they've got the resources. They've got recruits. They've got now NIL money. They've got the whole Nike situation. They played in the Pac-12, which was, not one of the more stronger conferences by tradition, I think you would say. So for me, I'm just going to go with Oregon just because of their relevance as of recently. You know what I mean? I can't really speak of Wisconsin before I was born, but it feels like Oregon, ever since I was in at least middle school, came out on the scene strong. And I thought for sure that they'd get one, right? Like, because they'd been at least they lost the one to Ohio State, I want to say. And it just like they had the quarterbacks to do it. They had Mariota, they had Justin Herbert, they've got it all there. It's just they haven't done it. So
just think if Chip Kelly had stayed at Oregon instead of going to the NFL. Like, do you think we're talking about Oregon with at least 1 national championship by now if he stays around the way he had that thing going?
I think so.
I do too.
I think so. And so, like, again, I think Wisconsin is probably more of the traditional answer. But for me, because of, more relevance and kind of my time as a college football fan, I'm going to have to go with Oregon, just because, again, like they have the resources to be really good and they've shown the flashes of being really good. They just haven't gone over the top.
I mean, it's Oregon more for the recency because of all the things that you talked about, especially probably the last 15-ish years, however long that's been, again, since Chip Kelly, really got it rolling. But then when you go back, like they've both been around since the late 1800s, but Wisconsin football has been a program for 135 years. They have 742 all-time wins. Notre Dame has only been around 2 years longer than Wisconsin, but they have more than 200 more wins than the Badgers all time. You would have thought that at some point in Wisconsin's, especially their early history, they would have kind of snuck out one of those national championships when you obviously didn't have playoffs and it was just polls and stuff like that. They probably got hurt by the fact, to some extent that, Notre Dame was out there kind of gobbling up votes across the Midwest, even though it was like, I think like early 1900s, before they got good again later. But like they feel like a program that could have somewhat mirrored the success that Nebraska was having in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, basically, because, it's like you get the homegrown, give it all that cheese-fed, corn-fed, offensive linemen and all that different kind of stuff. It feels like Wisconsin should have been that to some extent and just never never were quite there. So for the, again, like for the shorter term, more recency, I would definitely say Oregon, but the competition has also been tougher for Oregon. They went long periods without ever really being a high quality college football program, where it feels like Wisconsin should have been better, like 50s, 60s, 70s, that era, but they never were.
Yeah. So we agree that it came down to those two, though, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because like the others, like when you look at them, like Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Utah, Carolina, Missouri, Purdue, Baylor, NC State, none of them have ever been traditional, college football, just consistently really good teams, let alone national championship caliber. Obviously like Carolina and Missouri are basketball schools. NC State is a basketball school more so. So I don't think that's overly surprising. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Minnesota Vikings rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy only threw 34 passes in the fourth quarter for Michigan last season.
It's concerning. And the reason why it's concerning is in the NFL, it's just no lead is safe. And really, like every game in the NFL is as probably a touchdown or 2 touchdown score come the fourth quarter, right? And so I just think that it's a system or process that's not ultimately going to work in the NFL. And it's concerning because how do you know how J.J. McCarthy is going to perform in those high tense, high leverage, high stress situations, and it's
never been in them.
He's never been in them. And I understand that they had a great offensive line and a great running game, but it still shows to me an overall lack of confidence because his only job was to not turn the ball over. Right. And so that's what Michigan was content with is, okay, well, come fourth quarter, we're just going to hand the ball off. And as long as you don't turn the ball over, we're going to rely on our really good offensive line and our really good defense. And we don't even care if it's a close game, like some of those games, like I think Penn State, it wasn't a blowout in the second half, but they refused to pass the ball. They just wanted to continuously hand off the ball. And I guarantee in the NFL, there's going to be high leverage, you just can't hand the ball off to your running back anymore. You have to be able to pick up first downs. You have to be able to, extend the clock, keep drives going. And then there's going to be times too where you're going to have to lead a fourth quarter comeback purely on your arm. And so the fact that he has no tape of any performance, hardly any performance in the fourth quarter, that's really concerning to me, especially a guy that you are willing to invest your franchise in.
Like Sloppy Joe was saying, in the NFL, most games are won and lost in the fourth quarter.
Exactly.
The games are
and that's kind of what I was getting at with my opening statement.
Right. The games are going to be much more competitive in the fourth quarter in the NFL, where there are fewer teams and the talent level is closer together than in college, where a team like Michigan can just be, physical and maul everybody up at the line of scrimmage and, in a fairly average Big Ten from top to bottom. Like we've talked about before, the Big Ten is top heavy and just, all the things that you talked about. And then like in Hard Knocks, the Giants Hard Knocks that they're doing right now, they had McCarthy in, and when they had him in for his interview at the Combine and they were having him drop the play on the board, they were asking him some questions. And it's essentially, like Jim Harbaugh was pulling the strings. The guy didn't really even have to think that much, let alone make high leverage type throws in the fourth quarter. Like Harbaugh was pulling the strings from the line of scrimmage. The offensive line was doing most of the thinking for him in terms of coverages and stuff like that. So there was very little that J.J. McCarthy had to do. And, then on top of it, he has something like 1,000 fewer overall pass attempts in his career than most of the other quarterbacks who were selected in this year's draft. So like he is the product, like he's a product of just a very good system and a very good head coach who is making a high majority of the decisions for him. So I'm going to be really curious to see what exactly, especially his early career, looks like. Like if he was with Sean McVay, it might be one thing, because McVay is obviously, like he's known for pulling the strings and all that kind of stuff, especially when he had Jared Goff out there. But I don't know. I'm going to be really curious to see what he looks like. Okay, so with NFL training camps underway, Jess, we're going to start doing this question for each of the divisions How many teams from the AFC North can win the Super Bowl this season? How many you got?
AFC North. So that gives me the Bills.
No, that's the.
Oh, no. That's the Bengals, the Steelers, the Ravens.
Right.
And the Browns. I give that, of the teams in that division, I'm going to say 2. And I think it's the Bengals and I think it's the Ravens ultimately. I think the Bengals have enough offensively. It's just a matter of Joe Burrow, right? And can they be enough on defense? And then for me, it's the Ravens. It's like, can they get over the hump? You know, like they've been there. They have a really good defense. They have an MVP level quarterback. Like what is missing for them? A top tier wide receiver, a game-changing running back. That's got to be on the top of the list for me. In terms of the Steelers, they don't have any. They're just not offensively impressive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like end of career Russell Wilson or maybe a resurgence of Justin Fields isn't enough to excite me offensively. They'll be good enough.
I don't think it excites most people. Yeah.
They'll be good enough defensively to be a 500 or wild card team. The thing about the Browns is like what shows you that they're going to put back-to-back good seasons up, right? Deshaun Watson still a huge question mark. Is he actually there to play or is he there to collect the guaranteed money? They'll have a really good defense again. You know, they have the defensive player of the year of Myles Garrett. So it's like, I don't know. I just don't see enough out of the Browns and the Steelers. So it's got to be Bengals or Ravens. And I'm leaning more so towards the Ravens because I think they have more of the pieces like defensively.
I don't know if like DK has been sipping too many cocktails this afternoon or what. He's saying all 4 is the correct answer. There's no way the Steelers have a chance to win a Super Bowl. If I'm, like you said, they've got a chance to sneak into the playoffs like last year, like be right on that playoff bubble. They're not winning a Super Bowl though with what they've got. The Browns have the best defense in the division, but how much better can Deshaun Watson make him, assuming he stays healthy all year this year? Like I said, I can see the Browns making the playoffs.
Yeah, but what's the difference between their outcome last season? There's nothing to show me that they're not a first round exit out of the playoffs.
That's what I was getting ready to say. I can see them making the playoffs, maybe winning a playoff game, but that's it. That's their cap. I think that's as far as they go this year. I think the Bengals definitely have the best, overall offense in the division with Joe Burrow back, assuming he's healthy and there's every reason to believe that he is. Yeah, between Chase and Higgins and everything that they've got there, probably the most balanced overall team in the division because the Ravens have the most talented quarterback. I think they've got the best total offense, power offense with Derrick Henry. But look at what they did. They completely, coached themselves and play called themselves out of the game against the Chiefs in the playoffs last year. But Ravens and Bengals, to me, the answer is 2. Ravens, Bengals are the only 2 teams that have a chance. Either one of them you could see getting hot and making a run in the playoffs. So that's my answer, is 2.
Anthony did not like your comment there. I'm pretty sure he's a big Steelers fan. So that would explain it. But, I think the Steelers and Browns are pretty similar on offense.
They won a lot of games with Joe Flacco last year, right?
Right.
It wasn't because of the arm talent of Joe Flacco. It was because of the defense that they had. So is there a case for Pittsburgh? Okay, there's probably a case.
Who do you like better out of Bengals and Ravens?
As a team, you mean?
Yeah.
Honestly, I would pick the Bengals because if both quarterbacks are at full health, which team has gone farther in the playoffs before? The Bengals. They've gone to the Super Bowl just a couple of years ago. They beat the Chiefs to get there. So I've got to go with the Bengals.
They show, even though that they probably don't have as good of a defense, sadly, even though Burrow's never won MVP, he's shown that he can play at the highest level and propel them all the way to a Super Bowl.
As we've all seen, There's a big difference between winning regular season games and winning in the playoffs, especially when you're going head to head in matchups against other elite quarterbacks. And that's why quarterbacks are judged the way they are on championship.
I mean, it's the most important position.
Yep. So I would of the two, I would put the Bengals ahead because Ravens have had some really good regular season teams, but they've bounced their way out of the playoffs pretty early, just like last year. So Jim Leland was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame this weekend. Who is the next manager who should get the call to the Hall?
So I was reading some interesting arguments about this. I believe there's 271 players in the Hall, soon to be 280. And there's a lack thereof of managers. And I'm not saying that there needs to be equal amounts, but I think like a fair number is like 10% of the Hall should be comprised of managers at the end of the day. I think that there should be a few more managers than what there is, essentially. Sure. So my list came down to 4 guys. I'd be curious to see if those 4 are also on your list. I had Cito Gaston.
I didn't think about Cito. That's a good one. That's been a while.
Davey Johnson, Lou Piniella, and then I have a current guy, Bruce Bochy, but I mean, I think he's fair to consider. So kind of some brief resumes because I know there's not a lot of, ton of maybe baseball nerds like there are out there, like we are. But Cito Gaston won 5 division titles in 12 years, 2-time World Series champ as a manager
with Toronto. And what have they ever been since then?
Yep. With Toronto. And he was the first African-American manager to win the World Series as well. I think that has significance when you're talking about, the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Next up, Davey Johnson, 6 division titles with 4 different teams, 1986 World Series. And I think most impressive about him as a manager, he averaged a 91-71 record as regular season record as a manager. 20 games above 500 was his average record as an MLB manager. So I thought that was
Davey Johnson.
I thought that was pretty impressive. Next up was Lou Piniella, 17th all-time in wins, 6 division titles with 3 teams. Mariners have 3 division titles all-time. All 3 of those came from Lou Piniella. So I thought that was an interesting one about Lou. Bruce Bochy, 500 regular season manager, pretty even keel as regular season. But what sets him apart is he's 36-17 in the postseason, 5 World Series appearances with 3 different teams, and 4 World Series titles with 2 different teams. Obviously, last year,
Bochy's got to be a lock.
That's what I mean. That's why it's almost like when you go through his resume, it's not even fair to consider him.
Right.
So I'm going to go Cito Gaston and Bruce Bochy at the end of the day. Those are my 2.
I totally forgot about Cito Gaston. I think that is a great call, especially for someone your age. And even Davey Johnson is a good call for someone. I mean, because the Mets, there are a lot of people who think that they underachieved in that window because they were so great in 86, but they were never able to come anywhere close to doing that again, even though they got to the playoffs, but they got a little bit worse every year. But if you look at the futility of the Mets for several years before Davey Johnson took over, and then the fact that they did have that great 86 season, and then he was still pretty good manager when he was with Baltimore after that. So I think there's a case for him, but not nearly as Bochy. He's number 9 all time in wins, 3 World Series titles with the Giants, and then just won one with the Rangers, and then he took the Padres to the World Series as well. There's no way he's not getting in. There's just no way. To me, I'm surprised you didn't say Terry Francona, 13th on the all-time wins list, and won, of course, 2 World Series with the Red Sox, ending the 86-year drought in 2004, led the Red Sox to the only team ever to come back from a 3-0 deficit in professional sports to beat the Yankees in the ALCS. And then, of course, he got the Indians to the World Series, 1 win away, needed just 1 more win to win the World Series with the Indians. But so I think Francona's got a very strong case. And I think Dusty Baker's got a pretty strong case as well, because he's only got the 1 World Series win, but he also got the Giants to the World Series and also had some pretty good success with the Cubs before blowing that NLCS lead in 2003. But he's number 7 on the wins list all time.
See, but to me, it's like who you taking, Dusty or Lou? I think it's like one or the other if you're gonna, because they're kind of same era.
And I think Piniella is probably more widely considered the better manager, even though
he just didn't get the World Series, and so
Right.
like that's Dusty's trump card. But those two are so similar to me. I think you're either one side or the other, essentially. Because I consider Dusty Baker, but even though he has the World Series, I thought that Piniella had a more consistent kind of track record.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that he won those division titles with the Mariners and no one else has with the Mariners.
It's a good comparison, Sloppy Joe. Cito Gaston, Major League Baseball's version of Tom Flores. And Flores, of course, the Raiders coach. He's the guy who came after John Madden and won a couple of Super Bowls. But I think that, for a long time, he was kind of largely overlooked. But again, like when you look at the guy with, Latin heritage who led the Raiders to a couple of Super Bowls, Cito, as you said, the first African-American manager. Tommy's saying, who's Tom Flores? Again, the former Raiders.
I think the only thing that hurts Cito and is like, I know it's like, that's just typical kind of baseball mind. I just don't think he managed long enough.
Right.
He was just, they want you to be in it for like 20 to 30 years, right? You can't just have like a 10 to 12. That's the whole point of the Baseball Hall of Fame, is like consistent longevity success, either as a player or a coach. And so even though, Cito and Bochy were my two kind of guys, Cito would be really hard because, again, I just don't think he coached long enough. That would be my argument.
So Bochy is number one of all the names that we've mentioned. Who would be your number two?
I'm still going to go Cito, even though I still think he's deserving. I just don't think the MLB would ultimately put him in.
I think it's a good choice. Maybe he gets in at some point, but I still think Francona would be my number two because of the Red Sox drought and the fact that he got not just one, but two.
And he took a completely different organization to a World Series as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And they kind of, not to say they collapsed, but they kind of did.
But like small market, they were always competitive the entire time he was there in Cleveland. So
John's got my back here.
Back-to-back champs should make up for the length.
Especially in Toronto. Like, Toronto has not done anything.
Yeah, and I mean, let's not forget, like, the Braves were America's team in that span, but it was, I guess they beat the Phillies in one of them, but it was I guess they beat the Phillies and it was the Twins that beat the Braves. So I don't even know what I'm talking about, but the Blue Jays came in. Yeah, but yeah. So my point was going to be, like, of that era, one of the best teams, one of the greatest teams of that era.
For fun, who would be your number three?
I like the case that you made for Piniella, but again, I think what works against him is just the lack of the championships.
So maybe Davey
that he had.
Davey Johnson.
Davey Johnson. I like that. Where is he on the wins list? Do you know? Like, did he manage long enough?
Let's see. Davey Johnson all-time wins list. Why isn't it just like up there? MLB managers all-time wins there. That's probably what I should have looked up.
Dusty Baker is 7. Bochy is 9. Francona is 13. Gene Mock is 15. Lou Piniella is 17.
Jim Leland, who just got in, was 18.
Yeah.
Man, he's not even in.
Davey Johnson is all the way down
33.
At 33. And I don't think there's a strong case for Piniella as maybe I thought. I'm going to go Dusty. I'm going to bump Dusty up there. Yep.
I think my three would be Bochy, Cito, and then Tito.
Okay.
Cito, then Tito.
All right. I like it. Notre Dame alum Arike Agumbawale earned MVP honors with 34 points to lead the WNBA All-Stars to a win over the U.S. Olympic team in the All-Star game of the weekend. Scale of 1 to 10. How worried should the U.S. team be heading into the Paris Olympics?
I think a fun question is which U.S. team should be concerned more, the women's or the men's? But
I thought about that, but I figured that there was
we
also
can talk
a rabbit
about both.
hole. I mean, the last I saw, the men were struggling against Germany today as well. Did they end up winning that game? Do you know?
I'm not sure, but I mean, it took a literal last-second bucket to beat South Sudan the other day, and it's like,
I know.
then you flip on, and you see the women's Olympic team is losing to the WNBA All-Star team. Scale of 1 out of 10. I think this has to be an 8 out of 10 to me because of, this is basketball and this is the United States. This is the sport that on, both men's and women's that is always dominated. And so it's not a good look, especially a nationally televised event where you're putting your supposed, best team in the entire country up against the All-Stars, and they can't even beat the All-Stars, right? And so maybe it's a lack of, who was taking it more seriously type situation, right? Did the All-Stars have more something to prove because they weren't on the Olympic roster? Was it more of like the Olympic roster kind of, feeling each other out, getting their legs underneath them as a starting rotation? I don't know, but it's like, again, when I think of U.S. basketball and the Olympics, I just think of like the dream team, and not even the dream team, but just dominating, right? And so when I see, the United States is struggling against its own All-Stars, when I see they're struggling against South Sudan, Germany, I put both teams at an 8 out of 10 on my level of concern.
Yeah, see, I don't think it's really a concern for the women's team because I think what it does is just show the depth that, like the women's game has. I think that you could probably, just send the WNBA All-Star team that won this game, and they could probably win the gold medal with that team as well. I still think that the Olympic team is going to win the gold medal. Like when you look at the play of Arike and Caitlin Clark, I think it verifies the fact that Diana Taurasi got a complete sympathy vote by even being on this team. She has no business being.
I mean, why were they double teaming Clark the entire width of the court?
Right,
length of the court. Sorry.
Right, and she didn't score a lot, but she still had 10 assists. And Agumbawale just goes off in the second half after having nothing in the first half and ends up scoring the most points in an All-Star game ever. And those are the two who, were the most notable snubs on this whole thing. So, yeah, like people talk about Clark being a marketing, like, oh, it would have just been a marketing ploy if you had her on the team and all this stuff. It's just a sympathy vote by trying to get Diana Taurasi another gold medal. That's the only reason she's on the team, trying to set a record with her, rather than actually having some youth and excitement on the team in either one of these two. And I think that they both showed that they absolutely belonged on this team. I mean, like Clark made Kelsey Plum look foolish out there a couple of different times. Sloppy Joe says she dropped out. It's one of those, she dropped out because she knew she wasn't going to be on the team kind of things. That's essentially what
it's like when the head coach gets fired but resigns.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But in any case, good for them. Again, I'm not worried about the women's team. I think the men's team should absolutely be worried because they've already got a track record of completely underperforming at the Olympics. And
I think they have a lot of pressure.
Yeah. To only beat Sudan by 1 point. Ooh, man. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. We do appreciate you being here. As always, hit that like button before you leave. Notre Dame football training camp, 9 days away. It starts a week from Wednesday. And of course, we will be with you here all the way through Notre Dame football training camp and through the season as well. Forget that 40 days or whatever it is to the start of the season. 9 days is when the season starts, when training camp rolls out. And we've got you. All right. Again, hit the like button. Appreciate it. We will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.